The purpose of the conversation today is to give an introduction to our newest team member. And we're really excited because Karan coming on board with us is really an avenue for us to support you, our clients, more. For us within the company, we've been in sales and marketing our whole journey, professional career. So we've never been in the position that you may be in, which is the reason why we started to explore in 2023. How can we scale? How can we take our support to you to the next level? And this is where we started to say, okay, why don't we bring somebody on board that has already done what we're supporting our team in doing, our clients in doing, that's you. And from there, we said, okay, now let's bring somebody in internally. Fast forward, we now got Karan in the picture, which I'm really excited for. So Karan, let's just kick it off. If you want to give the crew, the people watching that are on the recording or in live, a brief introduction as to who you are, where you come from.
Absolutely. And Sebastian, thank you again. I'm happy to be here, happy to be a part of the team and give our clients the guidance they need. I think one of the things that we've seen in mental health is this coercion of the business atmosphere and the clinical atmosphere and how difficult those two can be. And with what I've done for a good number of years is bridge those two together and bridge that gap. So I'm happy to be here. Just a little background on myself. I'm an MD. I do have a business degree as well. I've owned 2 TMS clinics and owned and operated them. We've had about up to 4 chairs, 500 plus patients, 15,000 plus treatments. When we get into the numbers of it, though, I look at it this way: 500 plus lives that have been impacted by what we've done. And to me, it's one of the most gratifying things ever. And best practices, to me, conventionally speaking, are one of the best ways to provide the quality over quantity based care we need in healthcare. I know in mental health, there's an ever-growing discussion about self-care and how we can treat patients in mental health. I think the idea now is, how do we get the awareness created? And marketing is one of the tools that we have to use when it comes to making sure we're getting the information out to the patients accordingly. So happy to be here. Excited to get this going. And for any of our clients that would like to talk to me one-on-one, you always have the option to. I love jumping on calls with our clients, seeing what they do, seeing how they work, seeing what their operations look like, and more importantly, give you guys the feedback and the right guidance you guys need. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's definitely a key component that we want to touch on consistently. If you've already been on a call with us with Karan is always making his time available. Again, his whole role is to communicate with you, the clinic, as to how he could support, what are some things that he sees on his end that are not necessarily working or that could be working to the next level. So with the background coming in with, obviously we're integrating business into a medical practice. What are some of the key components of successfully integrating a business development strategy into a TMS and ketamine clinic?
Sure. So, one of the things that, we've done is, it's a great question, because when you're talking about integrating business development strategy, the one thing you have to remember, though, is that we're working in a healthcare setting. And as much as we look at patients as leads, patients as individuals who are looking to get better, the one thing I've learned is that, having the coercive atmosphere of a business-driven environment that is focused on quality-based clinical care, that's the most important thing. And one of the things that really stands out to me is staying consistent. In mental health, patients are reaching out to you, not in a similar way if somebody was reaching out to a cardiologist or a primary care. Because in mental health, you are limited in the amount of functioning capacity you have to do the right thing for yourself, to get the right outreach, to make the right causes. And when a patient reaches out to your office or your clinic, they're looking to get better. They're looking to find a way to improve their quality of life. So, the one thing you have to be, and obviously I think everybody knows this who's in the field, being mindful, being patient, being consistent, and making sure that you're doing the right things, collectively speaking, to provide patients the resources they need. And one thing I want to touch on that question that really stands out to me is the educational value you provide your patients, because that's essentially what this is all about. For somebody to want to get better, to commit to getting better, they have to believe they can get better. And I think that educational component, using the academia, what we do, and as a business avenue of teaching the public on what treatments are out there, what treatments are effective for a specific population, and giving our patients the right amount of resources to do so is really important. So educational content and value is extremely important in a business development strategy. And more importantly, staying consistent with outreach is one of the biggest key indicators of success.
So as we talk about the consistency, because I mean, consistency in life in general is key to achieving any sort of success. As you're referencing consistency and you say outreach, do you mean specifically you're reaching out to people that are coming into the pipeline, or what do you mean when you reference consistency and outreach?
So, I know, beyond our team here, we really, I guess not enforce, but reinforce the ideology of, consistent contact with your leads that come in that are patients. That's exactly what I'm getting at. These are mental health patients. For them to just submit information or an inquiry online to find some sort of element of care is a huge step. That's a huge leap of faith for them. That is a leap of faith or an objective that requires them to commit to something. And that commitment initially is them giving their information to you, reaching out to you, calling your office, dropping in, whatever the case is. So once that communication is established, the consistency of how often you follow up, which I know can sound a bit salesy, but in the reality of it, that's what we have to do. Personally speaking, our office, the one thing we did with our staff and our team was making sure that if a patient reached out to us, we didn't hear back, that we did follow up with them consistently. And that was from a 7 to 10 day span, having some sort of email or phone outreach, just letting them know, hey, we're here for you. I understand this is a lot of information to digest, because it is. Whether you provide ketamine, whether you provide TMS, or even just regular psychiatric medication management, there are so many variables these days that can deter a patient from coming to your office. So be the value, be the reason that they have that trust and commitment and faith in what you're doing and what you're providing. And that isn't limited to just saying, oh, you're depressed, here's a med, take this and go home. No, why are we seeing treatment resistance? About 30 to 40% of the population currently is suffering from treatment-resistant depression in terms of the patients that are depressed or diagnosed with MDD. So if we're seeing an element of TRD or treatment-resistant depression start to increase in numbers the way it is, that tells you that there are a number of people out there that aren't finding any relief or resolve, and we have the modalities to help them. It's just bridging that gap in terms of communication, awareness, and educational value. And that goes from the element of having a consultation that's informative to making sure that patient follow-ups are done, so patient retention is there as well. When I say patient retention, I just don't mean a clinic having patients come back in for more treatment. I'm talking about building a long-term relationship. That's how healthcare must be. How often have you heard, oh, I've gone to my doctor for 25 years? How often do you hear that in mental health? It's very rare. So that consistency is what's important, I think. And I think we have to be the catalyst to change that. I hope that answers the question, but yeah.
It does. I mean, it makes you think of something so important, because here we are, we're dealing with two modalities, ketamine and TMS, that, I mean, you go talk to 10 people, 8 out of the 10 have no idea what it is. One person confuses both treatments with whether abuse through ketamine or whether ECT. And then one person either went through it and loves it and raves about it. Okay, so let's say out of 10, 7. One person loves it, one person didn't get results from it. So we're in the position right now where both modalities, it's like the law of innovation. It's going to take time before everybody jumps on board. And this is why it's so important that if you're a provider, if you're a clinic owner, and you're part of a clinic as a staff member that's supporting this particular part of the business grow, it's going to require some nurturing, like Karan is pointing to, consistency and reaching out, educating, being that level of value, that source of support. So that somebody like myself, if I'm a, let's say, depressed patient, I'm not going to know what questions to ask. The main question I'm going to ask is my insurance covered, or how much money is it? And if you're stepping into either ketamine or TMS, I mean, both of those, you could be putting yourself in a hole. So how can you drive a sense of value first and then take a look at the costs? Now, Karan, with bringing on a business development strategy, as we're creating a system to generate more patients, it's a patient acquisition system at the end of the day, what we do within Beyond Marketing. What would you say are some common pitfalls that you've noticed with your past clients when you're in the consulting space that clinics encounter?
Well, I hate to say it, it's the truth, but this is just the way the world works. I think we put profits over patients too often. And there's nothing wrong with making money. I'm not against that. Heck, I love that, right? But It's at the same time, are you helping people and making money and doing it evenly across the board? So I think the focus on volume for some providers becomes one of the primary motivations to establish yourself in mental health. What I think we have to look at is, let's focus on the quality of what we provide versus the quantity of what we're doing. That's number one. Because what ends up happening is you're not putting value on those 5 to 6 patients that you could have spent more time with, because they become this organic referral source. I can't tell you how many times we've had a consultation or an evaluation with a patient and their family members have come to us and said, we want to do this because everything you're saying to me is clicking on all cylinders. And that to me is something that I put a lot of value in, because that was organic referrals through our own internal efforts. Some other pitfalls, I think there's a failure to understand the market. I think conventionally speaking, not everybody is a depressed patient and that's it. There's other co-diagnoses. So let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about PTSD. Let's talk about OCD. Just because the insurance criteria are all about MDD, which I understand, and there's certain, contraindications that can be discussed, I think we have to be objective to the fact that not everybody comes in with the same shape and size, right? Metaphorically speaking. So I think that failure to understand the market is also a big issue we're seeing, because again, we're not really educating patients on what is anxiety. Why do we have such levels of anxiety? Why are 1 out of 3 people diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder? And what does that tell us about the conventional direction we're going in? The other element, I think, Sebastian, you're going to love this. It's the lack of effective branding and marketing. I mean, that's really what I think stands out here. We're not using our marketing tools and automating systems in place. I mean, it's simply, we have everything at our fingertips to do this correctly. So using CRM tools, I know at Beyond, we use Move, a lot of different, softwares and CRM tools, but automating some sort of level of consistent communication through technology is really helpful. I'm not against the old school way of using a pen and a pad and all that. I get that, but there's tools at our discretion that can really create a better strategy when it comes to marketing, when it comes to, training, when it comes to management of your patients and their progress, doing a monthly check-in. It's not rocket science. If you can automate a system when your patient completes treatment, whether it's TMS or ketamine, to have a monthly or semi-monthly discussion, follow-up call or email goes a long way. So there's things that you can do that also help create that brand and really stick out. And then one last thing I think is inadequate training of staff. I think we've had a conventional understanding that, okay, in TMS or ketamine, we can hire technicians and medical assistants to help us operate and perform these treatments and procedures. But how much are you investing in your staff and what they do? Because the reality is the face time they have with your patients, it's majority of that time that they come into your office, they're seeing these people. And if the reflection that patients get that, Mike was my TMS technician and he didn't really hear what I was saying that day, or, Sally at the ketamine clinic didn't ask me how I was feeling, or whatever the case is, my point is there has to be a consistent level of, regular training sessions, monitoring staff performance, identify areas of improvement. You can't have one patient receive a TMS treatment with treater X and it was phenomenal, and in the same office later in the day have another patient with treater Y and they had a horrible experience. And I kind of use the method of Starbucks. I can go to any Starbucks and, I'll keep it in this way, not across the world. It's a little different around the world, but in the US, no matter where you go, it's the same experience majority of the time. And I think that we should apply that universal approach to what we do in a clinical setting as well.
Bringing in what you mentioned before, the idea of consistency.
Yeah. I mean, it's Occam's razor. It's the simplest explanation, right? I mean, I think that applies here more than anything. And less is more in some ways, but being consistent is one of the, and that starts in the business end to the clinical end on all directions.
When you were, and so powerful, because I mean, you're pointing at a couple of different key points that we've seen consistently as patterns. When you were at the clinic that you were at and you were helping it grow, you were there for a couple of, how many years were you with that organization?
Sure. So just to touch on that, so it was about 4.5 years here in Tampa Bay. we had an offices in Clearwater and St. Petersburg, up to 4 TMS devices, med management, counseling services. We had a few MDs, physicians, nurse practitioners. I really invested in my staff because the thing is, that's my team. They're the ones that are reflection of what we do as a business. And one of the things that really stood out to me there was making sure that, we had a objective approach to patient education. But going back to what we did, over the course of those 4.5 years, we were hitting certain numbers, and we looked into why. Why are our response rates at the 90th percentile, 92% to be exact? Remember, a response is a 50% reduction in your baseline symptoms over a course of a treatment duration. Remission rates, meaning, you're having little to no symptoms at all. We're hitting remission rates of 70%, response rates of 92%, patient retention at 42%. By patient retention, I mean how many patients came back to us, because not everybody comes in the same shape and size or physiology from the brain standpoint. So some patients had treatment resistance with TMS. They felt better for a few months. They said, I'm not really feeling what I felt after I finished. Let's do a second round. Let's do some maintenance. Let's keep them going. Let's get that relationship consistent enough where they can trust us and we can improve these numbers on a large scale so we can show the public, hey, there's a system that works here. And at our office, after 500 plus patients, 15,000 plus treatments, the experience and insight I gained into this field was, look, this is not, a commercial transaction. This is something very deep. And you have to get deep. You have to get your hands dirty. But the reward, to me, is one of the most gratifying things, to see the amount of people that come out on the other side and how their lives have changed. Until still to this day, I speak to patients here and there and check in and see what's going on. And it's just astounding to see that the impact we've made is now a lifelong journey we've created. And the goal I have here with our team is to make sure we do this on a national level. And that's what, I want to bring to the table for our clients, because mental health is evolving. Technology is evolving. Business practices are evolving. How do we stay, level enough to do our job correctly?
So powerful. So, okay. So with those key points that you just mentioned in regards to building the business and making sure that the staff is attentive, being able to equip them, if you walk into a clinic and you're supporting them and you're like, this is like the first time you're looking at what they're doing in the realm of looking at systems and looking at people, what are you specifically looking for in order to say, okay, they're missing this, or they should be doing this differently? Do you have like a specific way to go into it?
That's a great question. So we actually had a client success call with a client of ours recently, and we got to listen to a bit of a phone recording of a patient calling into the office about TMS. And the young lady on the phone, she's very sweet. Obviously, she knows what she's doing in terms of saying the basics, but when a patient calls and he says, hi, I'm interested in TMS and I'd like to know more. Well, we'd love to, have you come in and talk to us. Well, what exactly is it? Well, it's an in-office treatment that helps with depression. Those were the two lines that were given to the patient. And then the follow-up was, well, how much does it cost? So we can run your insurance benefits and we can let you know, and then we can schedule an appointment. So right off the bat, you're kind of deterring the patient from not giving them enough educational value. So to answer your question, there have been countless occasions and times where I've seen this type of practice occur, where we're focusing on trying to find a qualified patient. A lot of providers, and clients across the country that I've talked to, there's this understanding that, the patients that are, the meet criteria, have no contraindications, are eligible to receive TMS, they're just going to walk right in. It doesn't work that way. You have to go through the masses and filter through to find the right ones. And that's going to require the time to have some conversations that may not necessarily go anywhere. But hey, at least you're practicing the element or the art of that phone call, the art of that discussion, the art of that consultation. And to me, that's been one of the biggest, barriers I've seen, because the public is there. The numbers are there. We're talking 8 to 9 million diagnosed with depression. We're talking how many of them have TRD, treatment resistant depression. We're talking how many have co-diagnoses with anxiety, OCD, and PTSD and other indications. So the numbers are there. The metrics are there. It's just how do we filter them in? And I think, again, staying consistent with patient education, the content, the value of that content you provide, whether it's a phone call or email, is valuable enough for the patient to make an informed decision. That's what we, as a MD, when we, went to med school, did our internship years, we took an oath to do no harm, but to do everything we can. And I, for the public. And I feel that one thing we have to remind ourselves is how much, information are you putting out there? So to answer your question and to keep it short, there needs to be a level playing field in what you're putting out there with every phone call, no matter how disengaged the patient is, no matter how unqualified the patient may seem, and no matter, how lost a intake or a lead may sound, because you don't know what that person is going through. Remember, we're working with mental health patients. They're not like calling in saying, "Hi, I'm Billy, I'm ready to do this." That's not, I mean, if that's the case, I would love that for all of us, right? But with mental health, that's not how this works. We know that. We know that there's a need for us to provide some sort of insight for the public, and that can be done with our office. And this goes back to staff training. If your front desk is trained and prepared and given the right talking points, then I think that conversation becomes easier. And once they come into your offices, whether it's ketamine or TMS, and once they see what you're about and what you do, and you have that setting in that environment that's warm and welcoming, then the rest, the process takes care of itself. And I think that's a really important factor to consider.
I mean, and Karen, you're speaking on supporting the team. And one of the key things that we always explore within Beyond Marketing is we don't build a business, we build people, and then people build a business. So
Yes.
as you were working with clinics, and when you were working with your clinic for the 4.5 years, and like you just mentioned, sometimes the conversation leads nowhere. What are some, I guess, tips or guidance or support you can give to providers or clinic owners, or maybe even the staff members themselves, to keep themselves with a high level of stamina and high level of motivation as they're making these phone calls that may not lead anywhere?
So as far as some of the tips go, I think internally what your process is like as an office is really important. So let's give you guys an example. During my time in owning and operating, the practices, we had weekly roundups with our TMS team. So there is the entire office where you have your providers, your counselors, nurse practitioners, your MDs, and then our TMS team separately. And the reason is, where is employee morale? Is my staff okay? One of our technicians, her dog had passed away, and I knew that this is not a good week for her. I feel the pain. I empathize with her. So if I'm not taking the initiative to making sure that my staff is taken care of, or understanding what their obstacles are personally and professionally, then how can I let them perform treatments that are crucial to help my patients in terms of getting better, right? So understanding what your family, aka your team, is going through and where they're at from a professional level and a personal level is extremely important. Weekly roundups with all of our staff and team. It was something that really actually translated in better outcomes. Our clinical efficacy as an office improved when we invested our time into our team. And that can come in a number of ways, from how you compensate your employees and your team to what you offer them. I think there's other ways to look at that. Some other tips, and again, this goes back to, education. I think Dr. Google, he's out there or she's out there. She's got all the information we need. Use it. Let's talk about what's updated, what's changing, what innovations are coming into TMS. What exactly is deep TMS versus regular TMS versus theta burst? Your patients are going to look at this information. And if your technician, your front desk cannot answer those basic questions, then you are not an expert in the field. If I have to call your office and I'm not getting a clear-cut explanation over the phone on what theta burst is, but Office B is giving that to me over the phone, guess where I'm going? Of course. It's as simple as that, right? So I think staying informed with what's happening from a professional level, academic level, whether it's through Clinical TMS Society and what their involvement is, what some of the research is putting out there. And one thing to add to your question is where is your contribution to the field? I think a lot of TMS providers and ketamine providers know that they have lots of valuable data. If your office has metrics on how you perform and you're doing well, market that. I can't say anything loudly, right? My point is, use your numbers. If you're seeing a specific response in a certain direction and it's standing out, let's throw that in there a bit. These are some ways that these are some tips that I would advise on, because it's the work you've put in. This is data that's worth some sort of monetary value, in my opinion. Put it in front of the masses. Publish some research. Do a poster presentation. Do something to give yourself that academic credibility without just saying that we have a physician on staff. Because again, why are you the expert in this field? So when patients came to me, the one thing they asked, well, how do you know that the off-label right side treatment is much better for your anxiety-based patients? I think we all know that with TMS, we can do a left side for depression, high frequency, right side, low frequency for, anxiety-based disorders. And it's different amongst certain spectrums, but how do we know that? We studied it. We published some data on it. We have a study that's with Marine Simulation Journal that came out that really reinforced some of the talking points for us. So, this gave us that pedestal to stand on, but also gave us a little bit more credibility, and that really stood out for us.
So having data and being able to share that data.
Yeah.
With your team, your staff members, how many staff members were you supporting? And on those weekly roundups, how long would you say those lasted, and what would that really entail, those weekly roundups?
Sure. So the team, we were about 14 people total. And there's a lot going on with 14 different lives, right? Family and friends, personal. So we wanted to be mindful of everyone's time as well during the office hours. The meetings the weekly staff meetings would be approximately about an hour. And the content of these meetings would not be limited to just, where are we with patients, as far as, how many people we have in the chair. It was more about what's happening in these rooms. Why is Mary not responding? We did some PHQ-9 and GAD-7 this week. It looks like she's not really responding. We're 5 weeks in. What's going on? And the collateral information that our technicians, or TMS therapists, as we call them, provided was the value in what our physician was missing on in terms of some of the visits that she had. Because our physician, one thing I made our physicians do was every week, make sure you jump into the treatment room and just say hi to the patient. Now, every practice is different. How you use your physician's time, that's up to you, or your providers, that's really up to you. But my value in having that physician go back to the treatment room, from the physician's office to the treatment room, and spend just 2 minutes to check in, that's so valuable. But during those weekly meetings, the physician is not able to ascertain in 2 minutes exactly what's going on. So our staff and the team would collectively provide that collateral. And during those meetings, it became a weekly roundup. Why is John having a great week this week? Well, this week he's stepping out and going to Home Depot, Publix, and Walgreens, something he hasn't done in years. Why is Sharon showing an increase in anxiety? Oh, she has her exams coming up. So there's a story behind why your numbers look the way they look, so we can understand what's happening to our patients and why their responses are such, and then more importantly, what we can improve on. It was a great way to get that constructive feedback. And I use the word constructive, not critical, because this job is not easy, guys. We're in mental health. I think we've taken, the burdens on our shoulders to provide quality mental health care, but it's not an easy, task. So having a team that is collective, aware, mindful, and more importantly, informed, to share some insight during these times, some things that we may miss or another provider may miss, this is extremely valuable. And again, the TMS team or the ketamine team that you have, they're the face of your practice, right? So they have to have that face time, but they're going to give you some valuable information. Listen to them, hear them out, because they might pick up on things you may miss.
So awesome, because Karan, you're speaking at primal human being ways of being. I mean, we're tribal by nature. Here we are, right. But in business, unfortunately, it's like we have these little silos. And these little silos are running the business, and these silos never come and communicate with one another, when there could be so much information that can be gathered. On top of that, now it's a culture. Now it's not employees. Now it's a culture of people with similar vision that are all focused on one goal. And that creates a sense of engagement. That creates a sense of connection within the whole team, which ultimately also drives performance, which is what we're looking for. Correct. Okay, cool. So we got clarity as to how you generate that level of connection with the staff members. How about on the patient end? How did you maintain and how did you build positive relationships with them, and how did you communicate with them on an ongoing basis?
Sure. So as far as building the relationships during the consultation, whenever patients came in, the one thing we looked at were, we had them write this out actually. What are 3 things that you haven't been able to do because of your depression? And what are some things you want to do? We document all of this. During the process of treatment, getting into that nitty gritty about what the patient's goals and objectives are, and if they're actually reaching them, we call them SMART goals, right? Sustainable, maintain them. If you can achieve goal, what's realistic, what's teachable. Looking at the specific SMART goals, I think was really helpful for us. But as far as the consistent level of communication, our outreach, was clockwork. If a patient missed an appointment, or if a patient had to reschedule or cancel, or whatever the case is, we wanted to make sure there wasn't anything from a mental health standpoint limiting them from that. And that really gave our patients that commitment and trust in us as a part of their family, if you will. And again, this is not like other elements of healthcare. I think we can understand that. And again, I'm not knocking mental health care for what it's become. I think it's great that we're going the direction, but from where it was in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, we treated it like this was conventional primary care medicine, which it's not. You're not going in for a regular checkup, because what your blood pressure and your vital signs can tell you may not tell you what's going on up here. And I always tell patients one thing: your body, your blood pressure normally is 120/80. We don't know what the normal brain pressure is. We just know that things are imbalanced. So I always tell patients, just our body has a level of homeostasis, so does our brain. And when I drive that point in with a lot of our patients, when I say if you feel like your neurochemical balance is going imbalanced, let's have that reach out to us. Don't hesitate. If 1 to 2 weeks go by and you feel like there's no discernible reason as to why you're feeling the way you feel, then give us a call. If not, we will call you in 3 to 4 weeks. Our follow-up structure was monthly. Now, I've seen some practices do every 3 weeks, which is fantastic. Nothing wrong with that. I can promise you, if you're a mental health patient that's treatment with you guys and they feel fantastic and they're getting calls from you a month later, 2 months later, 3 months, they're not going to be upset with that. That actually is a very encouraging and reinforcing sentiment that you're creating. On top of that, I think, providing marketing material, newsletters, blogs. We had our monthly group yoga sessions, which patients had access to for life. A small investment for us as an office, but a large scale retention, response. Why? Because, those guys give me free yoga every month, and I've been with them for 2 years. I did TMS with them 2 years ago. I can tell you right now, not every patient that we treated would show up to our monthly group yoga sessions, but 10 to 15 patients on average, and the initial investment was $200 a month for me. It's worth it. So these things that we created, in addition to providing patients a smartwatch, a $30 to $40 investment per patient for the duration of their treatment to, make them accountable in terms of, are you getting physically active? How are you sleeping? And again, not a medical device, just a reference point to understand what is happening on the other end of the spectrum. Because again, the patients are with you, whether it's TMS or ketamine, there's only a fraction of the day they're there in the office with you. With TMS, half hour per day. With ketamine, a couple of hours per week, right? So looking at it from that perspective, what are they doing on their own time? And as much as nobody wants to have fingers pointed at them, but you do want to be held accountable. So you're going to a doctor for, help me. Right. That's what you're telling them. They're asking you that. So let's help them. Let's hold them accountable. Hey, what are you doing on your own time? Are you hanging out today? And what are you watching? A bunch of murder mysteries? Don't do that. You're a depression patient, right? Let's talk about that. These are specifics that we're not getting into as often as we could. I think that really creates a level of consistent communication.
Which is so key, because you're giving people the ongoing support. I mean, I know that as of right now, one of the key things that are missing specifically within the ketamine space, for example, is that sense of integration. How are patients going through treatment being supported once they're at home? Same thing with TMS patients. They're going through treatment, they're feeling better. And we got to remember, people are going through depression, they're breaking through that. So those patterns, while they're being worked on a biological level, the patterns at home, if they're not being shifted up and if there's no sense of accountability, they're going to go back to the old patterns. And what happens when we go back to the old patterns? We get the same exact results. So that's brilliant. Correct. That's brilliant. And then you're giving people the intangibles, the intangible of a coach of a yoga session every week. People the intangible of a watch, while it's a tangible watch, the intangibility of accountability and knowing what's actually going on for patients. Really awesome. With the latest research, and you mentioned before on supporting the staff and staying up to date with the latest research, what specifically would you do, and how would you support clinics in staying up to date with any sort of the latest research that's happening or trends in the mental health space?
So that's actually a really good point. And I actually wanted to mention that to you as well and to the rest of our attendees today. The data tells you everything, right? Numbers speak. We know the response rates aren't there for everybody with, TMS and ketamine alone. I think there's multiple modalities that have to be considered. It's not just one treatment avenue that works. I think we have to look at what the research tells us. And again, going into the tangibles that you mentioned, if we're not utilizing them consistently, then we won't see the durability and efficacy of certain treatments to be as durable as they can. So when we have providers that provide ketamine, and then some provide ketamine assisted psychotherapy, in my opinion, the research shows that ketamine assisted psychotherapy, there is a quicker response with some of those patients. There is more of a durable response with some of those patients. So again, I circle back to, we know that this is a or more of a global approach that you have to apply here. And that's what the research indicates. And telling your staff and talking to your team about, hey, encouraging patients to get physically active, making sure nutritional counseling is done. A lot of our eating disorder patients, one thing I always ask them was, we don't want you to talk to a nutritionist, not yet, but once we start getting to that point where we're working past some eating disorders, let's have those discussions about nutritional content and value, and how that coincides with certain modalities of treatment. Again, with TMS, I think partnering TMS with therapy or partnering ketamine with therapy or counseling, I mean, it proves itself in terms of the outcomes that you see with the national data. Now, let's talk about some of the research that we've seen in Brain Stimulation Journal, along with some research overseas. There has been a significant improvement in a lot of durability of outcomes for some TMS patients across these different studies, with the incorporation of not just cognitive behavioral therapy, but dialectical behavioral therapy. And obviously, just to talk about two, cognitive behavioral therapy is more focused on, self-awareness. We're talking more about, the distortions or anxiety that we discuss on a large scale. Dialectical is more psychodynamic or more interpersonal in terms of self-regulation of our emotions and things like that. So very different therapies. And then there's interpersonal therapy, right? So there's different avenues that we can exhaust, but finding the right type of therapy and pairing that with the treatment, I mean, that, bar none, to me is one of the best things you can do. And I'll just cite an example. We had approximately, I think it was 20 plus patients with severe anxiety and severe depression. But with those patients, we had individual counseling sessions provided, because I knew for their outcomes, for their response to treatment, we had to really drive in the CBT and DBT element. And I used a lot of the literature that's been published by not just Dr. Sackham, Dr. Harold Sackham from Columbia University, and Dr. Aaron Jacobson and what he's done in the field. Dr. Mark George has talked about this, right? These guys are pioneers and legends and godfathers, if you will. They've come out and said this too. So I'm just feeding off what I've heard from the peers and people that I look up into the field. I've talked to Dr. Andy Kozel up at FSU, to even Sir Anthony Barker himself, the founder of modern neuromodulation, if you will. And we understand that we are training the brain to build these muscle habits or muscular routines, and that's everything that the brain does. The brain's a creature of habit, right? And we're training the brain to become more effective and going to the brain gym, if you will. But what do you do when you get there? How do you see the efficacy of that workout you've done? Let's test the waters a bit. If you ask someone who hasn't trained to run a marathon at all, let's just say that I've been eating McDonald's every day and drinking soda all the time, not sleeping, not working out, nothing, and I ran a marathon tomorrow, I'd collapse like maybe 2 minutes in, right? Sure. But if I trained to run that marathon and now I've put the time and work in, I have the tools and resources to sustain the endurance to keep that marathon going. And part of keeping that marathon going is going back to what resources we provide from a personal level and a psychodynamic level. And I always say one thing about mental health treatment: it's a marathon, it's not a race. It doesn't, it's, we're in this element of consumer gratification. Everybody wants that quick fix. It just doesn't work that way. I think we all know that too. And that's a big, big part of it.
Ooh, man, I feel like there is so much that we can go down. I think for now, for this conversation, is an introduction to Karan, his expertise. Obviously, today's conversation, we spoke about the pitfalls of integrating a business development program into a clinic, understanding what the process is to actually optimize the clinic itself, ways to keep the staff engaged, which look like weekly roundups, which brilliant. I mean, within Beyond Marketing, we do that every single week ourselves to make sure that the company, the team is on track for the same mission. So I can absolutely see how that could be supportive on the medical standpoint as well. So thank you, Karan, for taking the time to go over everything. If you're watching the replay, if you're watching live, if you have any questions at the moment, you're welcome to ask. If you're watching the replay, you're more than welcome to reach out to us and have Karan communicate with you and the team directly. Again, the purpose of this is to be able to have Karan work with you so that we can take a look at the clinic level and on the patient enrollment level, how we can improve on the process and ultimately be able to generate more success for the clinic, bring on more patients, and hey, do our little part in making a big impact in the world.
Absolutely.
Would it be okay if I asked a question?
Of course.
Yeah, sure, Cindy.
Yeah. So you were talking about how you found it beneficial for patients while they're doing TMS to also have like a counseling session during TMS. So how do you usually do that? Because the insurance will cover one or the other. That's what we found.
Right. That's a great question, Cindy. So there's two ways to look at that. And from an academic and research standpoint, we have something called online TMS, where a patient is actively receiving psychotherapy while they're in treatment, or offline before or after. We performed more offline TMS counseling. So the therapy actually wasn't done during the counseling session for two reasons. One, it just didn't make sense for us to kind of shove all that, quality-based discussion into a 30-minute window, especially when there's this little angry woodpecker tapping on our patient's head, right? And they're having the sensitivity to treatment. It could be discomforting at certain points. So it's just hard to really engage with the patient. So normally what we would do is do a session before. If there were more anxiety-based patients, one of the reasons I had them do the counseling before TMS was just because it actually would kind of highlight those pathways, activate some of those pathways that are getting that default mode network riled up, if you will. So from a clinical perspective, that was really helpful. We didn't bill for it. We actually incorporated it as a part of our program. Reason being, for some of our patients that we knew that, we're going to have a tough time with treatment due to the fact that TMS does come with certain waves in terms of how a patient responds. I think we all know with TMS, you can activate the neurotransmitter release, and patients can feel their depression more. They can feel their anxiety more. Some patients get worse before they get better. I think processing some of that is extremely important. So to answer your question, we made the investment as an office to offer for a 6-week duration of TMS, 3 counseling sessions with our in-house counselor during that time. And then if their patients would prefer, desire to continue with the counselor, they had the option to after treatment. So now you've established that relationship, you're comfortable with your counselor, your treatment team, and it's a nice transition into having that patient go into the counseling side of things individually once TMS is completed.
So what we find is like most of our patients, that I would say at least 75% of the patients that we're seeing, and doing TMS for, they already have a counselor. They're either referred from an outside counselor or a counselor within. So would that be the same counselor or somebody different?
So that's a great question. I mean, I should have actually touched on that as well. If a patient is already seeing a counselor, we don't want to break that relationship up. You have a level of trust and commitment to somebody that's working with you, and they have an agenda on what they're working on. We don't want to interfere with that. Our approach was hands involved enough to do what we have to do, but hands off when it comes to stuff that, if the patient already has a relationship with a counselor and established care. The question then comes up to is what the counselor's thoughts are on that patient's case. So to give you an example, we had a patient with major depressive disorder and a co-diagnosis of PTSD. And with TMS becoming very activating, some of the trauma can be resurfaced, if you will. So we actually reached out to the counselor. We obviously had consent signed between all parties, so we can have an open conversation. And I can tell you one thing, that patient, she was just so touched and so appreciative that we spoke to her counselor at length about what we can do to make sure this process works for this patient. The counselor at the time did encourage the patient to see her individually as often as she can during TMS, if there was a need to. Again, because of what I discussed with the counselor, and this is a big talking point, talk to your local counselors in your area. Inform them on what you're doing as a TMS clinic or a ketamine clinic. One thing I spent a lot of time doing was going to counselors' offices almost every week all around the county to do little informational lunches and sessions. Obviously, it's a great referral source. It really worked well for us. But the one thing we did was create this educational value where counselors can tell patients, hey, this is what TMS is. This is what we normally do. If you want to keep your counseling going while you're in TMS, you can. If the diagnosis or co-diagnoses are very tricky, we may want to hold off and wait till TMS is completed. We have that option, but I think we leave that clinical decision up to the physician and the counselor to work together and create that collaborative atmosphere. And I can tell you right now, that's one of the best ways to go about it, because you build that trust with the patient, you build that trust with this counselor, and I think it's a great way to add a consistent source of referrals as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Cindy. It's a great question, by the way.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate the engagement. Well, Karan, thank you so much again. If anybody has any questions directly, please go ahead and reach out to the team. We'll get you connected with Karan directly. And this is just the beginning. We got a lot of stuff coming. Absolutely, Braca. Right now on the 17th, so not next week, but the following Wednesday, we're going to be doing the Art of the Consult, which is going to be a supportive way. Yeah, Karan is really creating this amazing playbook, really, where it's taking something that may not be happening in a duplicatable and systemized way and doing it in that way so that we can have more repeatable patterns of success, and we can see where we may be falling off if we're not seeing success throughout the actual consult, which ideally, again, is to generate more patients over the long term. So make sure you stay tuned in. We'll send over a reminder. Karan, thank you again, my friend. I appreciate you. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you guys. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And if you ever need to talk to me individually, I'm an open book. I'm here for you guys. Let's make this happen.
Yes. Amazing. Awesome, Karan. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.